Long before the name Nzinga echoed through kingdoms and courts, she was just a girl in the heart of Ndongo, one of the strongest kingdoms in the lands we now call Angola. Born into the royal Mbundu family, Nzinga was cradled not just in love, but in expectation. Her father, King Kiluwanji, saw something in her eyes, sharp as the blade of a warrior, quiet as a listening owl. While other girls were taught to tend fires and grind millet, Nzinga was taught to read the signs of power. She would sit, not with the women at the back of the courtyard, but at the edge of her father's council. Her presence unsettled the elders, but the king allowed it. "Let her listen," he'd say. "She hears more with her eyes than some of you with your ears." She watched the kingdom change. The Portuguese had arrived on their coast not long before she was born. At first, they came with crosses and sugar, then with muskets and metal chains. They didn't want trade anymore. They wanted people. African people, to be marched across forests and rivers, sold like goats, and taken away in ships that swallowed the horizon. Nzinga grew up hearing whispers about how her father had resisted these invaders, burning slave posts, sending warriors into forests to rescue the captured. But the Portuguese were not easily shaken. They wanted Ndongo, and they had more guns than the Mbundu had spears. When her father died, the crown passed to her brother, Mbande. But where Nzinga had been raised with courage, Mbande had grown in fear. He distrusted everyone, especially Nzinga, whose wisdom outshone his. Still, when the Portuguese tightened their grip, it was Nzinga he sent to speak on behalf of the kingdom. Not because he trusted her, but because even he knew, when the kingdom needed strength, it was his sister they listened to. And so, the girl who once watched from the shadows now walked into the light of power. The child born in the heart of a kingdom was becoming something rare, a woman the world would never forget. By the time Nzinga reached womanhood, Ndongo was no longer the confident kingdom her father had ruled. Her brother, King Mbande, wore the crown, but it sat uneasy on his head. The Portuguese had set up camp along the Kwanza River, tightening their control, demanding tributes, and enslaving the people of Ndongo at will. The once proud capital trembled, and even the chiefs began to whisper, some wondering if Mbande was fit to rule. Nzinga saw it all. She watched the people suffer, the chiefs bicker, and the Portuguese grow bold. Her brother distrusted her, perhaps jealous of her presence and intelligence. Some said he feared she would take the throne. To weaken her, he had her infant son killed and forced her into exile. But Nzinga did not crumble. She retreated, quietly building alliances. She spoke to chiefs who felt abandoned, to warriors tired of orders from a fearful king. She had no throne, no army, only her words. But her words were sharp, and her tongue cut deeper than swords. Where Mbande ruled with suspicion, Nzinga moved with strategy. She studied her enemy, learned their language, their religion, even their customs. She didn't reject what was foreign. She studied it like a lion watches prey. Then, in 1622, Ndongo was desperate. The Portuguese had launched brutal campaigns, capturing territory and flooding the kingdom with enslaved captives. Facing ruin, Mbande had no choice. He called his sister back, not with pride, but with necessity. He needed someone who could stand before the Portuguese and make them listen. And so Nzinga returned, not as a victim, but as a diplomat. She cut a striking figure, clothed in fine cloth, adorned with royal beads, her posture tall, her gaze unblinking. She was not there to plead. She was there to outthink, outtalk, outmaneuver. To the Portuguese, she was a woman, but to her people, she was already something more. Before she even stepped into the Portuguese camp, Nzinga knew one thing. If her brother could not protect the kingdom, she would. When Nzinga entered the Portuguese camp in Luanda, it was not as a queen, not yet, but she carried herself like one. The year was 1622, and her brother had sent her to negotiate peace with the Portuguese governor, João Correia de Sousa. But it was no ordinary meeting. The tent was filled with European soldiers, church officials, and colonial dignitaries. At the far end, the governor sat high on a wooden chair, sturdy, carved, deliberate. All around him were similar chairs for the men of his council. But for Nzinga, they had placed nothing, not even a mat. To many, it would have been a small insult, a missed detail. But Nzinga saw through it. This was a test, a silent way of saying, "You are beneath us." If she stood, they could look down on her. If she sat on the floor, they would see her as less than equal. The whole room would. She did not flinch. She did not argue. Instead, she turned to one of her servants. With a single nod, the man knelt. She raised her long robe, adjusted herself with grace, and sat on his back. Calm, upright, royal. And just like that, the power shifted. She looked the governor directly in the eye, her face a mask of poise. No fury, no fear, just pride, cleverness, and control. For hours she negotiated. She spoke Portuguese fluently, better than most expected. She offered peace. She offered alliance. But everyone in that room would remember something more than her negotiation skills. They would remember the woman who made a throne out of a man. That moment echoed far beyond the tent. In villages, elders whispered about it. In markets, women smiled and repeated the tale. A woman with no weapons had walked into the lion's mouth and sat on her own terms. From that day, Nzinga was no longer just a princess or diplomat. She was a force, a queen in all but name. After the famous meeting, Nzinga returned to Ndongo not just as a negotiator, but as a symbol. She had secured peace, for now. She had stood tall in a room meant to humble her. And she had shown the world that Ndongo still had a spine, even if it was wrapped in a woman's skin. To seal the treaty, Nzinga agreed to be baptized as a Christian. It was a strategic move, not a spiritual one. She took the name Dona Ana de Souza, honoring the governor and mimicking his own surname. Some in her homeland grumbled. "She's giving in," they whispered. But Nzinga knew the language of power. If the Portuguese respected titles and religion, then she would speak their language, better than they ever expected. She attended Mass. She spoke with missionaries. She played the game. But while she honored the treaty, the Portuguese did not. The peace they promised was hollow. Not long after Nzinga's return, the Portuguese resumed their raids. They captured land. They enslaved more of her people. The treaty became a joke, one written in Latin and burned in smoke. Her brother, King Mbande, grew weaker. His paranoia deepened. Surrounded by enemies and haunted by guilt, especially for the murder of Nzinga's son, he withered. Some say he took his own life. Others say he simply faded. But either way, he left a broken kingdom behind. Nzinga, once cast aside, was now the only one with enough strength to lead, but the chiefs would not accept her. "A woman cannot rule," they declared. Nzinga did not argue. She packed what remained of her loyal guard and crossed the river into Matamba, a neighboring kingdom. It had its own rulers, its own traditions, but that did not stop her. She seized the throne with courage and cunning. And once again, she was not given a seat, so she carved one out herself. Matamba became her new base, a place to regroup, rebuild, and resist. The Portuguese thought they had tamed her, but they had only lit the fire. And now, Nzinga was no longer asking for peace. She was preparing for war. Nzinga did not just arrive in Matamba, she conquered it. The kingdom of Matamba, east of the Kwanza River, had once been a rival to Ndongo, but its rulers had grown weak and its people weary of instability. When Nzinga came, she did not beg to be accepted. She marched in with warriors, wisdom, and words, and like a rainstorm over dry land, her presence could not be ignored. Some resisted, but Nzinga had learned how to strike before the enemy even rose from bed. She fought with fire, but also with fairness. For every chief she defeated, she offered terms. For every village she entered, she restored order. In time, the people of Matamba saw something in her that even her birth kingdom had failed to see, a queen born to lead. She did not rule like a puppet of men. She crafted her own court, filled with loyal advisors, fearless soldiers, and even female bodyguards trained in the art of war. She built a new capital that combined the best of Ndongo's tradition and Matamba's strength. Traders passed through her territory under strict watch. No one stole, no one bribed. If they did, they disappeared. Nzinga was not just a warrior queen. She was a ruler with a mind like a chessboard. She controlled territory, but also trade routes. She formed diplomatic ties with anyone who could help push back the Portuguese, including the Dutch, who were also enemies of the Portuguese in West Africa. Her rivals watched in disbelief. A woman, this woman, was now the sovereign of two powerful kingdoms, united by fire and fury. Where others saw weakness in her gender, Nzinga built strength in her strategy. She passed new laws. She reorganized the army. She personally led raids to rescue captives and punish collaborators. She rewarded loyalty with land and punished betrayal with silence. And silence under Nzinga meant the end. By the time the Portuguese realized what she had built, it was too late. She was no longer just the queen of a fallen land. She was Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, a name whispered in fear, respect, and legend. The hills of Matamba echoed with the sound of hooves and drums. Nzinga was no longer defending a throne. She was fighting a full war. But she did not fight like other rulers. She fought like the land itself, unpredictable, cunning, and relentless. The Portuguese expected battles with rows of soldiers and clear fields, but Nzinga turned the trees into allies and the rivers into traps. She mastered guerrilla warfare long before the word was written in any book. Her warriors moved through thick forests, striking in the night and vanishing by dawn. She ambushed Portuguese supply lines, freed captives on their way to the coast, and destroyed forts one torch at a time. Her soldiers respected her not just because she ruled. They respected her because she fought beside them. Nzinga did not sit in palace safety. She rode with her warriors, dressed in battle attire, armed with both spear and plan. Stories spread of her disguising herself as a common soldier, slipping into enemy camps just to listen. And when new threats came, rival tribes siding with the Portuguese, chiefs tempted by trade, she dealt with them swiftly, sometimes with diplomacy, sometimes with iron. Nzinga also played politics as fiercely as she played war. She courted the Dutch, offering them access to inland trade in exchange for muskets and alliance. With Dutch firearms and her African strategies, she became a nightmare to the Portuguese, who now found themselves trapped between a queen and their own greed. Back in Luanda, Portuguese governors sent urgent letters to Lisbon. This woman will not be broken. And indeed, she would not. Some whispered that she dressed as a man in battle to show she was above gender. Others claimed she trained her female guards to fight like wildcats. Some said she never slept in the same hut twice to avoid assassination. What is certain is this: Nzinga waged war not only with weapons, but with patience. She could wait a year for a single move, and when she made it, kingdoms shook. She was no longer a queen hiding in the forest. She was a storm. As the years crept into her bones and gray streaks lined her braids, Nzinga did not slow down. She sharpened. Her steps may have grown measured, but her mind still moved faster than kings, governors, and generals. By then, she had ruled longer than many of her enemies had lived. Portuguese governors came and went. Treaties were signed, broken, and signed again. But Nzinga remained, unbent, unbothered, unshaken. She transformed her kingdom from a land of survival into a center of strategy and growth. She ordered roads between Ndongo and Matamba, strengthened markets, welcomed foreign merchants, and mentored younger women in diplomacy and command. The palace courtyard echoed with the sounds of scribes writing laws, children learning history, and blacksmiths shaping tools, not just for war, but for building a nation. And yet, Even as she embraced peace, she never let go of power. She met returning missionaries with grace, but kept their teachings in check. When arrogant chiefs challenged her rule, she reminded them, politely, firmly, who held the spear. Her throne was no longer contested. But beyond all her victories, beyond the treaties, the battles, the trade, and the rule, there was one moment that echoed louder than any drumbeat in her story. The day she walked into a room full of colonial men, found no chair, and turned her servant's back into a throne. It was not carved from wood. It bore no gold. But it became the most powerful seat in African memory. That moment was not just resistance, it was declaration. I am not beneath you. And that act became a lesson written across generations. In Angola today, her name is etched in stone, echoed in the mouths of girls named Nzinga, and revered in statues that rise above city squares. She is studied in books, remembered in songs, honored in silence. Nzinga Mbande was not born perfect, but she was born to lead. And in every place where a woman lifts her chin and refuses to kneel, Nzinga's throne is still standing. Because sometimes, when the world offers no seat at the table, you build your own. And the throne? The throne was Nzinga herself. Stories connect us to our past, shape our present, and guide our future. African Legends and Stories is more than just storytelling. It is a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow, between tradition and modernity. Subscribe now and be part of this journey. Like, comment, and share to keep these legends alive. This is African Legends and Stories, where the past speaks and the future listens.